Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, Miss Ann married her second husband, which would take everyone to Oklahoma City. Episode 22, Divorce of the Decade, Part 2. Whatever you do, don't mess with her hair. The place, Salina, Kansas. The time, June of 1971. Going through the house in Salina to prepare for moving was a month-long exercise in Miss Ann-imposed chaos. She wanted everything done all at once and wasn't happy that it wasn't happening more quickly. We lived there 13 years, and with all the accumulation that suggests. So, many things of value ended up in the landfill or were passed on to charity that might still be here had she just stopped to listen for just a moment. Day in and day out, the torture that is commonly called moving continued. July 2nd was the exit date, so we spent the 2 days before packing everything the cheapskate wasn't paying to have moved into the U-Haul van. We were having our own adventure in moving, just like it said on the side of the truck. The caravan to Oklahoma started out in the early morning with Dawn driving the truck, Mom and Aunt Betty in the car with the dog, the cat heavily sedated, and us kids. And Uncle Bob, Betty's husband, was driving his car with our cousins Brian and Greg. We got to OKC at about rush hour. Pulling up to the house, which we had seen in photos already, was strange. It made the whole move seem real. As I looked around, I vowed that at the very first opportunity to escape Oklahoma, I would run like hell. When it finally came, I just drove real fast. It was the same thing. Once we got to OKC, life plugged along with Miss Ann screaming at us to get everything unpacked. She never really had to break a nail or mess up her hairdo in her life, as she knew that a well-timed screech at the right decibel level required for the job would get us hopping too. There was also redecorating to do. This being 1971, Miss Ann anticipated the vogue for bicentennial-inspired decor. She started with the family room by ordering red, white, and blue striped wallpaper. This all coordinated with the oak wainscoting and her Ethan Allen colonial-style furniture. She called it early American, but if any early Americans had color TVs, I hadn't heard about it in history class. This started Mom on a mania for wallpaper that forced Kathy and I to learn to do it really well and really fast. Every vertical surface in that house was eventually wallpapered over. All 6 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, family room, formal living room, kitchen, and 25-foot long hall. Lori, of course, figured out how to get out of these chores by screwing up so often and so well that she was always sent away to do something else, usually paint her nails, practice being a pop star in front of the mirror, or to ogle the neighbor boys who always called her meat grazer. I wonder why. All of this new wallpaper, which no doubt was the product of at least one clear-cut forest, was complemented by 2,200 square feet of red shag carpet installed over perfectly good oak parquet floors. The rationale was that we didn't want to wear out the wood floors. That was said without irony. In the meantime, we had moved Don from his bachelor pad. What an experience. The cockroaches I saw on my earlier visit were just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Not only did he have them swarming all over the kitchen and living room, they were in his bed linens, in his clothes hamper, in his closets, his dresser doors, in his cereal box. They were everywhere. Once we moved his belongings into the house, the cockroaches moved into the house as well. It was an infestation that took literally years to be rid of. This was because Miss Ann was so cheap about such things. She thought a spraying or two of Raid would do the trick and would never spring for an exterminator. When Kathy inherited the house after Mom died, the first thing she did was to call in the professionals who took several visits over the course of a year to finally put to death the descendants of Don's cockroach progeny. I thought it incomprehensible that someone could live in any degree of comfort with such an infestation and wondered at his sanity as well as Mom's blindness to reality. This was, well, unusual, and I thought it said something about Don the person, or at the very least about his standards of hygiene. Miss Ann didn't appear to be bothered by any of this. She had a ponderous capacity for denial. So, as you can see, we were very busy kids that first few weeks after we moved in, which helped us to sleep very soundly at night. I was an especially sound sleeper, needing nothing short of nuclear holocaust to wake me up. So imagine how I felt waking up in the middle of the night about a month and a half after we moved in to hear Mom screaming and crying. Disoriented, I ran down the hall into their room. I saw Dawn holding both of Mom's wrists against the headboard, and she was crying and screaming, "Let me go." By this time, we three kids were all there, and we headed towards him, and then he turned to all of us and said, "You better leave me alone, or I'll kill all of you." Kill? Kill? In all the screaming and verbal abuse Mom heaped on us, and there was lots, make no mistake about it, we had never heard the word kill. It was used in reference to bugs or weeds, or in one case, to Vivian when she told about a particularly alcohol-sodden adventure that she and Mom had had when they were teenagers, but it was never directed at us. Kill. It was at that moment that life, though difficult up until then, became surreal. I wouldn't have described it as surreal at the time, but that was because I didn't know what the word surreal meant until later. By that time, though, the chaos that our life became seemed normal and unremarkable. Miss Ann just called them incidents, and the next day, we were expected to act as if nothing had happened. That summer, it was decreed that I needed to earn my keep. Somehow my sisters were spared this task, and I was going to work at the Sands Motor Hotel. Don was converting the motel to apartments, as it seems traffic on Route 66 wasn't as brisk since Interstate 40 went in, so I was sentenced to work from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. I would be riding my bike there, which was a real treat for me, as in Kansas I couldn't ride in the street and only 3 houses either way. Now, I pretended that it was going to be absolute torture to have to be away from home so much of the day, sort of like when Brer Rabbit begged not to be thrown into the briar patch. To sweeten this deal, Don happened to hire a new manager for the place, a guy named John Bernard, married to his wife, Sandy. They got an apartment on the property as well as his salary. Now, John was a real babe, and he was my first boy crush. He was tall and lanky, with a good tan only to his waist. He also had curly, sandy brown hair, sleepy hazel eyes, a cleft in his chin, and a kind smile. And John had a motorcycle and drove a British Racing Green Triumph TR4 convertible. John always wore long pants, and I only saw his legs when we would go for a swim in the mermaid-shaped pool. He would wear this pair of faded red boxer shorts with a worn-out jock strap, leg straps hanging out underneath the hem. And I was fascinated. What poor John got as his helper was a shy, neurotic, pudgy, short, sissy kid with braces on his teeth who was a little slow on the uptake. God bless him, he was really nice to me and polite, something I didn't experience much at home. I would get there at 8 o'clock, and we would have coffee. "You're doing a man's job. You should drink a man's drink," he declared right away that first morning. So grown up. I was told that coffee would stunt my growth, but I drank it anyway. I haven't gotten any taller since then. After coffee, John and I would go about the planned work for the day, stopping at noon to have lunch. Sometimes Sandy would come home for lunch, sometimes it was just the two of us. I thought this was grand. Now, mind you, I never let on to Miss Ann. I wanted her to think that this was pure hell of the worst kind. If she thought I was enjoying myself, she certainly would have put a stop to it. Then, there was the day the FBI showed up during lunch. FBI. The two agents really did look like Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. from the TV show, with the gray suits with the skinny lapels, with the white shirts and skinny ties, hair parted on one side and loaded with Brill cream, and the leather wallets with the ID that had FBI in big blue letters. They wanted to chat. It seems that Don had been hiding out a fugitive from justice, a guy who had knocked over a bank in Jacksonville, Florida, to be specific, and the FBI wanted any information we could provide. It seems the gent had moved on just days before, leaving no forwarding address. Now, Miss Ann used to work for a bank before she married Dad, and when the show FBI was on TV, she would always tell us that we should always cooperate with the FBI, otherwise they would get us. Since I was on the job longer than John, by days actually, I led them into Don's old apartment where all the records were kept. They took what they wanted and left. That night at dinner, when Mom asked me what I did at work, of course I told them all about the exciting visit. "You didn't tell them anything, did you?" Don demanded, beady eyes narrowing. "Well, yeah, I showed them all the records in the apartment, and they took some," I replied. Seeing his reaction was a thrilling mixture of fear and pleasure. He went all purple, and his eyes bulged out, and he started shouting something about, "You're stupid, queer, sissy, goddamn, how could he do such a thing like that? Oh my God, I can't believe it," etc., while jumping over the table to lunge at my throat. After the visit from the FBI, I started keeping my eyes open a little more, and that summer proved to be a real education. Along with learning to do a mean drywall, repairing the riding lawnmower, and telling time by the shadows, my education included learning about drug dealers, prostitutes, and which mistresses of city councilmen were in which of the apartments. The Sands Apartments, which it was now dubbed, was not in the bad end of Bethany, it was the bad end of Bethany. John was sweet and protective, all the while explaining what everything that was happening meant. One day, a blonde, well, it was a wig, bad Dinell that any respectable drag queen could have spotted 50 yards away, came to rent a furnished efficiency apartment. Her name was Linda Freeze. When she signed the lease, instead of dotting her I, she made a circle. You know the type. She drove a red VW Beetle, and I would see her go to her apartment with the man, she never seemed to have moved in, and about an hour or so later they would leave. I was puzzled about it, and I asked John. "She's a prostitute," he said. "Prostitute? What's that?" I asked. I got the Cliff's Notes explanation of what a prostitute did for her career. There were similar explanations for drug dealing. Apartment 36, you stay away from that shit. It's trouble, he shouted. Mistresses, numbers 19, 25, 38, and 41. And stolen goods, which were stored in the house on the back of the property by Don. I learned that 30 days' notice to be condemned meant the place was really a falling down fire trap that we had to make look like a sound building. I also learned not to look up while you're spackling a drywall joint on the ceiling unless you are wearing safety goggles, because drywall compound in your eyes burns like hell and makes it real hard to blink. I mentioned the house on the property. It was another of the many puzzlements of that place. Don built it to live in, complete with its own swimming pool, apparently with wife number 2. Miss Ann was wife number 3. The house was abandoned, and it was left to fall to ruin in favor of the cockroach-infested apartment he lived in, which, by the way, took the exterminators 3 trips to clear out and was later declared a Superfund site. The house was used to store any stolen goods Don just happened to be fencing at the time. The pool looked like the lair of the creature of the Black Lagoon. There was so much mold in it. All good things come to an end, though. Summer break was over, and before I knew it, John and Sandy were moving to another state. I would be going to school, and my summer job was over. The first few wife beatings were alarming, but after a while, we kids began to accept the incidents as part of our weekly routine. There was a pattern to these events, which happened with such regularity that if I had been a little more enterprising, I could have made a fortune by charging the neighbor kids for a show. After a while, they became routine and not as remarkable as they were in the beginning. It was usually a Thursday. There was usually a fifth of Chivas Regal consumed by dawn, and the evening would be off and running just about 10:30, right about the time the neighbors went to bed, so as to keep more than one household awake into the night. There was also to be expected some sort of destruction of the house, from the sliding glass doors that lost out to some flying logs, to a kitchen ceiling that got pockmarked with a broom handle, it looked like gunshot holes, to the upstairs bathroom being denuded of ceramic tile because he found a hammer. We all eventually took this in stride. Didn't everyone's mother's second husband, because I never considered him a stepfather, break up the house in a drunken rage every Thursday evening? Miss Ann, of course, would be crying and upset, but the next day, all was repaired. I'm really good at home repairs now. There was one incident, however, that got Miss Ann mad, real mad at him. I mentioned before how she was all about her hair, sacred territory. This particular evening, Don was winding up into another one of his sessions and got it into his head to take a gallon of milk out into the garage and splash it all over the new car, which was a white 1970 Thunderbird, bought because it galled him to see Mom driving the Aqua Tuna Boat Pontiac that Dad had given her in 1968. It seems the solenoid on the starter was going out on this car, and everyone knew that repairing the solenoid on a rare, exotic 1966 Pontiac Catalina sedan was expensive, no, impossible proposition. Or so he said. Anyway, he was splashing milk all over the garage, and Miss Ann came out into the garage to tell him to stop wasting good food. Then he slung, and she was hit with a wave of cold, healthful milk. But it hit her hair, her freshly done hair. And not enough to damage the whole thing, but just one side so she would have to try to repair it and smell like curdled milk until her next hair appointment. Oh my God, she was mad. Somehow a baseball bat appeared in her hand out of nowhere, and she chased him all around the garage, beating the hell out of him in the process as the neighbors looked through the garage door windows in astonishment. There was a party next door, but we proved to be the entertainment. It was a wonder that there were no dents or broken windows in that damn car. Don, however, was black and blue for weeks. Miss Ann was like that. You could beat the hell out of her, you could destroy her house, you could sell her car, you could threaten to kill her children, you could turn her existence into chaos, but you mess with her hair and you'll die. There were many more incidents that first year, such as the time Mom's friend Ruth came to visit from Salina, only to have the visit cut short when Don beat the crap out of Mom just before the three of them were headed to dinner. Now, Ruth, as you may remember, was dating Dad when he, Ruth, Mom, and Bob Wilkie went on a double date and switched dates before the evening's end. Ruth was appalled Mom sat still for this treatment after being married to a nice guy like Dad. Now, remember, Ruth dated him. Then left late into the evening for home. She explained to Kathy and me as we helped her load the car that this was not normal behavior, and she couldn't stand by and watch Mom accept this. I wanted to die of embarrassment. One of the worst incidents, though, happened the following spring. It started in the usual way, continuing with the usual beating and destruction of property, and wound up with Dawn yelling, "Your kids are driving me away," before storming out the door and driving off. I heaved a sigh of relief. I didn't know what I personally had done, but wanted to so I could do more of it. I felt elation that perhaps we finally would be rid of him. But no. "You have to help me get him back," Miss Ann sobbed. "Why?" I demanded. As the four of us were kneeling in a big group hug in the dark, the whole sordid story tumbled out. It seems that they not only dated in the early 50s, but he had indeed gotten her pregnant. Then he ran his sorry coward's ass back to Oklahoma, leaving her to deal with the consequences. And what consequences they were. Remember, this was 1952 in Salina, Kansas. A young woman, she was 21 at the time, coming up pregnant and unmarried. Well, the talk from everyone in town alone would have been enough torture. But then there was her family and the treatment she suffered at their hands. I heard about another, less kind and gentle side to Grandma. Among other indignities, she made Miss Ann sit in a bathtub filled with turpentine to try to induce an abortion. Apparently, the entire family made her life hell, extorting sums of money and home furnishings from her in exchange for their help. I thought, oh, that's why they were all upset when he came back on the scene. Now all of what I thought of as an overreaction made absolute sense given the whole story, which we kids obviously didn't get at the time. Dawn, of course, held a grudge about her decision to put the child up for adoption, but what else could she do? He didn't step up to the plate and marry her, for Christ's sakes. What else could she do? So in his mind, his bad behavior was his way of punishing her for not keeping the child, and she was sitting still for it. So we continued to play the whipsaw game, as I called it. I call it that because our emotions were whipsawed back and forth. If Miss Ann was mad at Dawn, he was evil incarnate, and if we even looked at or talked to him, we were siding with the enemy. Nothing but blind hate would do. But if she was not mad at him, we had to love him like a father and be really, really nice, because if not, we were selfish and would hear her screech, "You don't care about my happiness. You're just selfish and want to drive him away." But after this incident, I was truly flummoxed. Even at 13 years old, I thought that if he did you wrong, and thoroughly so, like that 20 years before, why would you think it would be a good idea to even speak to him, let alone marry him? In a previous episode, I already told you of Mom's first anniversary and how it ended in her almost losing her life. As you may remember, it was after this that she decided that divorce was the only alternative, and this is when I met her lawyer, Harry. Otherwise, she'd end up dead, and we would end up God knows where. Long-distance relationships can be a recipe for disaster. This is because of the potential for concealing unpleasant things. Along with the alcohol abuse and propensity for wife-beating, Don concealed a drug habit, a tendency towards bestiality, with Brandy, his male toy poodle no less, hints of unwholesome interest in kids, I always kept a watchful eye on Kathy, and small-time hillbilly mafia connections. He got his drugs by mail, how convenient, from a pharmacy in the Valley View Hospital, a small hospital in some godforsaken hamlet in western Oklahoma. There were times when the package would be late. Those were hell-to-pay times, where the rages were more severe because they were complicated by withdrawal. There were a few times that we witnessed these withdrawals, and at first we were told that it was a bad case of the flu. But I had never heard of flu making one believe that spiders were crawling all over their body. I don't know if the drugs created the propensity for violence or just fueled it, but violence it was. The two are forever linked in my mind, and I really have no tolerance for either of them. They both made my life a tornado when I was younger, and I understood the connection between them. Now, I've been lucky in my life. that the information I need to proceed is put in front of me and in italics so I won't miss it. The first time I remember experiencing this was after one of the many incidents. This one involved Don's kicking in a door of an upstairs bedroom for whatever reason. All of the doors in that house now have full-length mirrors on them, as mirrors are usually less expensive to get than replacing oak veneer doors. Miss Ann and I were standing there looking at the damage. It was sunny. Then, for a brief moment, the sun was a little brighter, everything was a little more sharply focused, and Miss Ann had a funny look on her face. She turned to me and said, "You can choose not to live like this." This all happened in an instant. Then everything was back to normal. Except for me. The idea of choice, and this was a choice, and I could choose not to do this, life is choices, that idea rocked my mind. I puzzled about why Miss Ann chose the situation we were now in, but I couldn't fathom it. But it gave me something to hold on to, and even though I didn't have a choice now, one day when I was a grown-up, I would. And I certainly wouldn't choose this kind of life. When I finally moved out on my own, I chose not to have any chaos or violence in my life. When Matt and I got together, I told him in no uncertain terms that if he ever raised a hand to me, he should either knock me out and be gone before I came to, or he should kill me. If he didn't do either of those things, he would live in a world of hurt for a long time to come. Many things I could and did overlook, but violence and chaos were something I did not choose to have in my life. Dancing with landmines isn't the way to live. Now, this is why I couldn't understand or comprehend Mark's choice to stay with Victor. After I finished with Miss Ann's story, I insisted to Mark, "You need to get out of there. Once this line is crossed, there's no going back." "But I don't have any money to move," he said. "Well, call one of those places that buys up households of furniture, tell them to make a price and be out by 4 p.m., and then get on a plane to San Francisco. But you have to get out," I said. Instead, Mark played the "yes, but" game for a little bit, so I got him off the phone. Now, if you want to know what I feel or think about something unedited and without my Miss Manners filter on, wake me up out of a sound sleep about 2:30 in the morning to ask. The later the hour and sounder the sleep, the better. I will let you know exactly how I feel in no uncertain terms. So imagine a couple weeks later getting a call about 1:30 in the morning and hearing Mark's voice. Through the mental fog, I assumed that either he was at the bus station or the airport, and I mentally revved up to go get him. "Ken, I'm living in fear. Victor's gone right now, and it's the only time I can call. He has taps on the phones and watches me night and—" "Wait! You're still there?" I shouted. "You haven't left?" "No." "Well, why not?" "Because I still love him." That last statement sent me ballistic. "Listen, Mark. You woke me out of a sound sleep just to bitch?" There was silence. "Since you woke me out of a sound sleep just to complain, you're going to hear what I have to say and have wanted to say for the entire time I've known you two." Which got me started on a harangue about how they were not well matched and never seemed to be happy with each other the entire time they were together. I could never for the life of me figure out just why they were together. And now that Vic was beating him, the situation had lurched from the neurotic to the pathological. And I couldn't listen to it anymore. It wasn't helping him, and it was just making me fucking crazy. "Mark, I'm going to say one last thing, and then I'm hanging up. I will do anything I can to help you get out of that situation, but I will not listen to you complain anymore. I can't fix this situation, and from the sound of it, you can't either. You need to leave. When you're ready to leave, call me, not before." "Well, I won't bother you again," he said sarcastically. "You won't," I said. With that, I slammed down the phone and couldn't get back to sleep. As I realized later, I had ended another phase in our friendship. This is the end of Act 2. As I've said, our friendship had 3 distinct periods separated by events. At the end of Act 1, showing Mark the letter that proved that I had indeed taken his job and gotten my revenge ended that particular part of our friendship. This time, I assumed that I had ended the friendship, that I would never speak to him again. I saw that this was never going to change, that I couldn't fix it. With that, we begin the next episode, Act 3. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.